Have that on, eh? All right, so we'll do that again. Looking for the adoption of the special council meeting agenda, moved by Deputy Mayor Shepley, seconded by Councillor Verbeek. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. We'll go to presentations from administration. We have Rita Jabor, our Manager of Planning Services, in the room present with us tonight. So there you go, Rita, welcome.
Through the mayor, it's a pleasure to be with you all here tonight. Some of you I've worked with in the past and others I haven't. So I'm very happy to be here to present on your first real big planning matter to consider this year. We're here tonight to consider a residential subdivision in Harrow. The formal name for the subdivision is Phase 2 of Sunset Gardens. Just a word for those who may not know, residential subdivisions, the approval authority on those is actually the County of Essex. Because we're a lower tier, the Manager of Planning Services at the county has approval authority over plans of subdivisions, but seeing as the lands are within the town of Essex, you are a major stakeholder and you should have the opportunity to be consulted and to be informed of what's happening in your municipality to ensure that the subdivision and the proposed conditions are according to your policies and your bylaws. So we're going to move on to the next slide once Shelley has the presentation up.
We're just going to pause for 1 second to make sure our Zoom is running.
Okay. Thank you, Shelley. We're just going to move on to the next slide if possible. Thank you. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is really just for information purposes for members of council and for members of the public. We are going to introduce the subdivision, its layout and its components to you tonight. And we're going to offer you an opportunity to ask questions of administration. But the purpose is strictly for information purposes. As I said, the subdivision is located in Harrow and it's regarded as Phase 2 of Sunset Gardens. And we're going to move on to the next slide where we're going to look a little bit more closely at the subject lands. Next slide, please. So the subject lands are identified with a star on the map in front of you, and they're located in the Harrow primary settlement area. When we refer to a primary settlement area, we refer to an area that councils of the past have designated for growth. So all growth, meaning residential growth, commercial growth, industrial growth, is to occur first and foremost within the primary settlement areas. And you can see the delineation on the map in front of you. The settlement area is delineated in that red line that's dotted in black. So if you're looking at the location of the subject lands and that red line, you can see that it's literally right on the boundaries of the Harrow primary settlement area. In the settlement area, planning authorities, being the councils of the local municipalities and the county as well, have a responsibility to encourage residential intensification in these areas. So in terms of residential intensification, we refer to approvals of development proposals that are located in neighborhoods that are already built up. We refer to opportunities through policies to allow for second dwelling units, to allow for higher densities in residential neighborhoods within that settlement area. Next slide, please. So here we have a map of the subject lands. They're delineated in blue. And you can see it doesn't have a zoning layer on it, but you can see what makes up the lands as it is from a bird's eye view or a view that you might have in a plane. You can see that to the north, that's actually the first phase of the Sunset Gardens residential subdivision, which was approved probably over 25 years ago. So you see Dubas Avenue, you see Sunset Drive leading up to that vacant piece of land, which we'll be discussing tonight. The vacant piece of land is designated for residential development in the official plan. So councils of the past have already determined that this property is ideal for residential development. It's zoned to permit low-density residential dwellings, namely single detached dwellings, which is the same character of dwellings that you'll see in the first phase of Sunset Gardens. The property is also subject to a holding zone restriction. So what that implies is that councils have dedicated this land, have held this land for future residential development. And what that hold actually does is it prevents the construction of any dwellings until the draft plan of subdivision is approved, until services like roads, municipal water, municipal sanitary is in, lights are in, sidewalks are in, all the components of the subdivision are in to make it suitable for residential development. Next slide, please. So you can see the property again, it's highlighted in yellow. But on this slide, we're going to speak a little bit more of the environmental considerations. So when we consider a plan of subdivision, it's a very technical exercise because most of the time the zoning is already there, it's already in the settlement area, it's already designated for this purpose. So we are looking at things like its proximity to woodlands, to natural heritage features, its location in a floodplain, or in an area that might be controlled by the Essex Region Conservation Authority. So in the case of the subject lands, we know that there actually is no woodland or heritage feature on the actual site within the confines of that property limit, but it is located within 120 meters of an area of natural environment. So the area of natural environment is on the adjacent parcel, and you can see it on the map in front of you as that S feature right on the property next door. So this is an area that's designated natural environment in our zoning bylaw and in our official plan. And what that tells the planning authorities is that there is endangered species here. There is habitat for endangered species here. And if there is a development proposal within 120 meters, we need to take a closer look at the impact of that development proposal on those species. We know also that the subject lands are located alongside the Philip Ferris Drain, which is a major inland watercourse in Harrow. And you can see the Philip Ferris Drain on the map. It's identified and it's also delineated with that arrow. So it just runs along the eastern property limit of the subject lands. And this also has an impact on when we're considering a layout for a plan of subdivision, because there's certain setbacks that need to be met between proposed dwellings and inland watercourses that are prescribed in our zoning bylaw and as well regulated through the Conservation Authority. Really special to this property is its location within a highly vulnerable aquifer. So through the Ontario Clean Water Act, we have a responsibility to protect our drinking water sources. For the town of Essex, Harrow, it is Lake Erie. We do have aquifers, especially in the south side of the municipality, that are very significant, especially for those properties that are serviced by wells that don't have access to municipal drinking water. We know with the lands being within the Harrow primary settlement area that there are no dwellings, no residences within the proximity of this property that are actually serviced by wells. So the impact by developing the lot on that aquifer is very low. Next slide, please. In addition to environmental considerations, we also want to look at servicing considerations. So in the case of the subject lands, because it's phase 2 of Sunset Gardens, you already have stubs there to service the lands with respects to municipal water, to sanitary, and to stormwater connections. As I indicated earlier, you also have connections to Sunset Drive and Dubas Avenue, which service phase 1 and will service the second phase. So it is an ideal location for a residential subdivision. Next slide, please. In the next slide, we're going to look a little bit more closely at the proposed plan of subdivision. Next slide, please. And before we do that, we want to introduce our applicant. It is Castle Gates Towers Incorporated. They are developers throughout Windsor-Essex County. I think it's their first time developing in the town of Essex, so really happy to have them enter the scene. Their agents are Tracy Pilon-Apps from Pilon-Apps Incorporated and Brian Pierce from Baird AE, and they're both planners and they're both registered as delegates tonight. So in terms of the actual proposal, it is for the creation of 59 lots, which will ultimately result in the construction of 59 single detached dwellings. So for the purposes of a plan of subdivision, we are strictly looking at the lotting configuration. We won't be looking at anything to do with the buildings and their location on the individual lots. So again, the proposal is for the creation of 59 single detached dwelling lots. Next slide, please. Before we accepted a plan of subdivision, a complete application, there are a number of studies that the planning authority, being the town of Essex, through its planning department, through its engineering department, community services, as well as the county of Essex through its agents, such as IRCA and their roads departments, and the various ministries like the Ministry of Natural Resources, they have what's called a pre-submission meeting where they identify those studies that are needed to be completed and to be reviewed and that we need to be generally satisfied with before we bring forward a plan of subdivision for council or the county to consider. And usually those studies are mostly the same, but they may differ based on the environmental considerations and the servicing considerations and even cultural heritage considerations for the subject lands. So in this case, we had asked for a stage 1 and 2 archaeological assessment, which was completed by a licensed archaeologist, and it found no archaeological significance or potential on the lands. We had asked for a stormwater management report, which would look at the design to get stormwater away from the actual subdivision through a pond and into the municipal stormwater infrastructure. And that was reviewed and approved by our own engineering department as well as IRCA. We looked for a traffic memo, which they submitted, which looked at the impact of 59 additional dwellings, 59 additional families, and their impact on our road network, specifically County Road 20 and the local roads that will service this development. And it found no issues, and that was reviewed internally by our engineering department as well as by the County of Essex. And we also sought clearances from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry for endangered species or habitat because of the location of that natural environment within 120 meters of those subject lands. And those clearances suggested that there was no issue with any impact from the development on endangered species or their habitat. Groundwater impact assessments were not required here. And that was a directive of the County of Essex, and that would have been as a result of the highly vulnerable aquifer. Next slide, please. So in front of you, and it may be a little hard to see, is the actual plan of subdivision that's being proposed tonight. So you'll see the extensions of Sunset Drive. You'll see the extensions of Jubas Avenue. You will see that Block 61 is dedicated as the stormwater management pond. And you'll also see a cul-de-sac at the very end of the development leading up to the limit of the settlement area. Now, the applicants have proposed that cul-de-sac to be temporary, and that's for the following reason. So the lands to the south may be ideal for the future expansion of our settlement area in Harrow, because we have the servicing extensions there from phase 1 and phase 2 of Sunset Gardens. But we can't actually expand our settlement areas until the county tells us we need to. So that exercise is happening this year through our official plan update. It's actually a whole new official plan we're doing. But the county's doing an update to their official plan, and they've commissioned population projections for us, which will tell us how much more land we will need in Harrow or in Essex Center to accommodate residential growth. So because we're in this bit of a bind where we don't know what the future is of the lands to the south, but knowing that there might be a future for them, infrastructure and consultation with the applicants have agreed to the installation of a temporary cul-de-sac so that in the future, that cul-de-sac will not be permanent and that road can be extended to service the lands to the south. Next slide, please. So in terms of the proposed plan of subdivision, it is in keeping with the land use designation under the official plan. Like I said, it is residential and it's going to be developed for residential purposes and specifically for those types of buildings that are allowed under the zoning bylaw. One thing we did want to add was that a second dwelling unit is permitted under our zoning bylaw in a single detached dwelling or in a building that's completely detached and secondary to that main dwelling. So didn't want to discount that point because that's always a potential if somebody down the line bought one of those properties and decided to build two houses on that lot. It's a possibility either within or in a detached structure. So even though the ultimate result is 59, there may be a little bit more there as a result of these policies. Next slide, please. So as a result of receiving a plan of subdivision and application for one, there are a number of agencies that we have to circulate it to and we have to receive comment from. And we're going to look at what their comments were specifically in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, we've heard back from the Essex Region Conservation Authority, and they, like I mentioned, they did review the stormwater management ponds, and they did not have any issue with the subdivision as proposed. They have recommended a number of conditions that are really in line with what we would normally recommend. So one being that the stormwater plan be basically implemented as approved in the stormwater management report. That clearances be obtained from their offices just to clear the developments. And as we mentioned earlier, because of the location of the Philip Ferris drain, they wanted to be assured that there's going to be appropriate setbacks, or that we as a municipality through our zoning bylaw have strong enough language so that there are certain lots within that development, lots 46 to 50, so that there are appropriate measures to ensure there's no buildings or structures within that setback between the Philip Ferris drain and that main dwelling. We heard back from the school boards, the Greater Essex County and the Windsor-Essex Catholic District School Board, and their comments are mainly with regards to sidewalks. They want to ensure that there's sidewalks throughout this development, which there are, so that kids can safely get on and off buses. We heard back from Canada Post. So in terms of how mail is going to be delivered, it's a community mailbox that are generally installed in new subdivisions. So they made mention of that. And we also heard back from Bell Canada, which is one of the utility providers, and they wanted to ensure that through the proposed conditions that they have an easement to run their infrastructure lines through certain properties within that subdivision. Next slide, please. So as a stakeholder, we've also heard back from members of the Town of Essex administration, and we've identified 3 conditions for approval that'll be considered by council tonight when we seek their motion to support the subdivision through Planning Report 2023-01. So the first being that the applicant or owner enter into a development agreement with the town. So this is a very standard condition that we impose on plans of subdivisions. Almost every subdivision owner applicant will enter into a development agreement with the town because it'll specify what our expectations are of them during the construction phase. Construction has to be done in accordance with the servicing plans that were approved by our infrastructure department and IRCA. It'll specify such conditions as financial conditions. So in this case, we are not accepting parkland because the subdivision is close to an existing park as per our Parks and Rec master plan, but we are going to require cash in lieu. And that's equal to 5% of the parkland conveyance. And it'll be based on that appraised value when they actually get approval. So that's a financial contribution that they need to make to the town. So that'll be spelled out in their agreement, and it will be a condition that they must meet before they get final approval from the County of Essex. So in addition to the development agreement, we are also asking, originally, we were asking for easements to be registered over the temporary cul-de-sacs to ensure that we can use the cul-de-sacs, even though they will remain parts of those lots affected. However, we've had conversations with the owner and their agents, their engineering agents, and it's not yet determined whether the appropriate method is easements or whether the appropriate method may be land conveyances with conditions in the agreement to give back those blocks if the lands to the south are ever developed. We're going to explore that a little bit more, but for the purpose of proceeding with this to the County of Essex, we are just suggesting a friendly amendment to the motion and planning report 2023 to state that it either be easements or land conveyances for blocks 61 to 63, the temporary cul-de-sacs. And then finally, we are asking for restrictive covenants that would prohibit buildings and structures in the rear yards of those lots which abut the Philip Ferris Drain, being lots 46 to 50. So with a restrictive covenant, the municipality, in partnership with the applicant, has the opportunity to identify in a document that's registered on title of each of those lots, 46 to 50, what they can or cannot do within that rear yard. So because of the Philip Ferris Drain, there is concerns with having an appropriate working corridor to access that drains. There's concerns with buildings and structures that may be missed because they don't require a building permit. So even though we may have those conditions in our zoning bylaw, most people don't look at our zoning bylaw when they decide to put up a 100 square foot shed. With a restrictive covenant at the time of sale, that is the owner is made aware of what those restrictions are. So it's an added layer of protection for us to ensure that those types of structures, those types of buildings are not built within that prescribed setback. Going above and beyond that, there were concerns also with vegetation and with gardens in the rear yard. So the covenant can address that as well. It's really a document that we will work with the applicant on. So it is a bit of a back and forth until we find that really comfortable middle ground for both of us. The applicant through their agents do have some concerns with this condition, and they can speak a little bit to it tonight. But generally it doesn't impact approval of the plan of subdivision as proposed. It's really just a technicality that we are seeking to impose. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about next steps, what happens after tonight. Tonight at your regular council meeting at 6 o'clock, through Planning Report 2023-01, you will be asked to provide your resolution of support for the recommended conditions and for the proposed plan of subdivision. Once we receive that, planning services will provide that notice to the County of Essex, and the County of Essex will determine whether the subdivision will be approved or not, conditional on certain conditions. So once the county does that, they'll provide us with their notice of decisions, And then we will start working with the developer, with the owner on complying with those conditions. And the first one that you're going to see in front of you once we receive that notice of decision is that subdivision agreement, which we will work on drafting for you for the next possible meeting once we receive that approval. Once council approves that subdivision agreement, the applicant signs the agreement as well, and they can start commencing construction on municipal services. So at that time, they'll start putting in their water, their sanitary, their storm mains, their electrical, their sidewalks, and their roads. The applicant has 3 years to satisfy all the conditions of draft plan approval. And then finally, once they have satisfied all the conditions of draft plan approval, that's when the county actually grants them final approval of the subdivision. And that's when that draft plan you just saw on the screen gets registered at the land registry office. And that's when the lots can actually be sold individually. It is only until we remove that hold, once we have that plan registered and those services in, that they can actually obtain building permits to construct those individual houses. So the construction of the individual homes will only occur after all conditions have been met, after all services have been implemented, and after the draft plan becomes a final plan through approval through the County of Essex. Next slide, please. That was supposed to be a questions slide. It's just blank. I am here to answer any questions you may have. I know there's members of the public who may want to pose questions as well. But I'm also here with Kevin Gerard, our Director of Infrastructure Services, Jake Morrissette, our Director of Community Services, Lori, our Director of Development Services, and Kate, our Director of Corporate Services. They are all instrumental in developing this plan. So I may be deferring questions to them if they're not appropriate for planning services. Thank you.
Wow, Mr. Ward, that was really good. That was really helpful. I really like how our staff are doing these public open houses for the new plan of subdivisions. Any questions from council members? We'll go Deputy Mayor Shepley and then Councillor Hammond.
Jabor, do we have a lot size that they're going to be? I tried to find that on there and I'm not sure what size lots we're going to be set at.
Through the mayor, yes. So they're generally 50 by 100, which is the standard lot size for single detached dwellings.
One follow-up question on lots 46 to 50. So the no second dwelling, that there will be no second dwelling allowed on that property, from my understanding, based on the agreement you're going to propose.
Through the chair. So if the second dwelling unit is to be located in a completely detached structure than the main dwelling, it would not be permitted in that setback, but it could be permitted in the actual main dwelling.
That's it, Deputy Mayor. Okay, Councillor Hammond.
The only concern I have really is the stormwater management report and the where IRCA says potential impact on a high vulnerable aquifilter, groundwater recharge, but there's no impact assessment required for the groundwater. Do we have any idea what the state of our drinking water is in this aquifer at this current time?
For you, Ms. Mayor. So we don't draw from the aquifer for drinking water purposes. All the lands that are around this subdivision are serviced by municipal water, so there is no impact to the drinking water.
Through you, Chair. I get that, but at the same time, originally it was the drinking water for the town of Harrow until there was access. I hate to see us continue to contaminate it. I'm just wondering if have any idea, without these reports, do we have any idea what kind of state as far as contamination that aquifer is in?
Through the mayor, I don't have any reports that would specify the state of the aquifer.
Hammond?
I just think that maybe we should be looking into the state of that water rather than not having any reports done on it. Because like I say, it was the source of drinking water in the town at one time. Town waters come in. Hopefully it's cleaning up from what it was that prompted the town water to come in.
To Mr. Bohr, is that anything that we can add on as a condition of, getting that water tested?
Through the mayor, you can recommend any condition to the county of Essex if you feel it's reasonable. But we don't draw drinking water from the highly vulnerable aquifer anymore. So it will not have an impact to those surrounding residences. And that's really the main issue we want to look at when we're speaking to a highly vulnerable aquifer, is what's the impact on the drinking water system, but it doesn't draw from this.
We missed Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Further to Ms. Jabour's comment on the aquifer, if we do refer to IRCA's letter, if I could just read an excerpt from IRCA's letter. So in IRCA's statement, they did confirm that there are no associated significant drinking water threats within this area, and that the municipal water does not use the groundwater as Ms. Jabour has indicated. The other comment, which I'd like to highlight, is that IRCA has confirmed that at a minimum, this particular development should not result in any increased risk of contamination to this aquifer. Thank you.
I have a question from Councillor McGuire Blaze.
Chair, through the chair. The covenants that we're putting in place, were they in place for phase 1?
Through the mayor, none that I know of. Again, there are results specifically because of the Philip Ferris drain there.
I only asked because phase 1, it appears that there's a few houses that's back onto that Ferris drain, but they weren't restricted. So this is something new that we're asking of this developer, and this is a different developer than phase 1, correct? Okay.
I have a couple questions myself. One is regarding the sidewalks. If we're asking for sidewalks, and I understand we want sidewalks everywhere, but there'll be sidewalks in this section, but not in the north part of Sunset. From what I recall, I don't think there's, so it's going to be kind of weird unless we put sidewalks in the whole thing. There's going to be sidewalks in the bottom, which doesn't really make for a walkable community. That's more of a comment. And then at the bottom of Arthur Street in Harrow, and Councillor Hammond, you're going to hear all about this soon if you haven't already, but there's a lot of water. I think it's from the aquifers. There is a lot of water in the bottom 3 or 4 properties on Arthur Street, where it literally like runs. Some pumps are running and running and running and running. So I wonder if that is anything the developers or the agents or the planners have taken that into consideration, because I deal with a lot of complaints on the south end there, and people, frankly blame the town for letting development happen there. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, or if anybody, the agents are familiar with that.
Through the mayor, I'm going to defer this question to Director Kevin Gerard.
Typically, as part of a subdivision development, you would complete a geotechnical study, which would indicate how, the depth of the groundwater, how much groundwater is there, this, kind of what the material would be there. They would need to ensure that they did that to complete the design of the subdivision. So we are aware that as part of the highly vulnerable aquifer, that there is a significant amount of groundwater that travels through this site. And it was identified to the developer's engineer through detailed design, and we suspect that they have taken that into account in their design.
I have videos, it's quite a bit. So I want to see if there's any members of the public that have a comment. Now is your chance. Okay, sir, I need you to say your first and last name and your address, and you need to go back to the podium where the microphone is. Sorry.
Hi,
Sir, before you speak, I need a motion to allow you to speak. I need a motion from council to allow our Councillor Allard and Councillor McGuire Blaze, and we'll get your name now for the record.
yeah, name is Scott Draper. I'm at 304 Arthur Street in Harrow, Arthur Street South. This development directly affects me. If you look up the acronym NIMBY in the dictionary, you will see my name, not in my backyard, NIMBY. There's nothing I can do about it, but I do have several questions. The first one is the groundwater impact assessment not required by the county, according to what I heard. When these houses go in and it rains, what assurances do I have that water won't accumulate in my backyard? If no one is looking at that impact, how can I be assured of that? Do we have a builder on record, or is there a company that's going to be doing this development? Do we have a realtor of record? Salesman who's going to be selling the houses? I understand it's a 3-year timeline. According to our glorious premier, certain number of houses have to be built within a certain timeline. Otherwise, the municipality is responsible for development fees. Is that going to be taken into account? Will it be done by that time? That's about it.
Thank you for your comments. I'm not sure if any one of our directors or Vita, our manager, do you want to try to attempt to answer some of them? Director Gerard.
Through the mayor, I can speak to the stormwater management portion of the question. After that, I'll have to probably defer it to my colleagues. But there was a stormwater management plan that has been completed for this property for the entire subdivision. That follows a regional guideline that has been adopted by all the regional municipalities as well as IRCA. That guideline states that no municipal water or any stormwater can actually travel beyond the boundaries of that property. So overland flooding is looked at. So no overland water would be shed onto private property or adjacent property. It all needs to be collected within the subdivision itself and directed into the stormwater management pond that is proposed as part of this development, and then released at a rate to not impact downstream residents, cause erosion, things like that. So that's all done as part of a comprehensive study called the Stormwater Management Plan, and that was completed as part of this subdivision.
If I may.
We'll have one rebuttal and then.
Can I be assured or guaranteed that the builder will not have the houses built behind my house 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet above mine?
I think we now have a policy on that, right? Director Chadwick, we did look at that in the last term of council.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, Madam Mayor. I think what I'm hearing you say, though, is in relation to the lot grading. So the lot grading would be approved as a part of the stormwater management plan and would be incorporated into every single building permit application. And so I think they're called lot grading sheets, which are also required as per our development standards manual. I think maybe, Madam Mayor, you may have been referring to, I believe the policy in relation to porches and decks, which is separate from the standard for lot grading and lot sheets. I just wanted to clarify earlier when I did have my hand up that to the delegate, sir, Director Gerard had clarified information related to drainage and stormwater management. However, to clarify, the comment that came from IRCA was related to the groundwater / aquifer and not related to stormwater management. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any further questions? Okay, any further questions from council members? A motion to receive the presentation from our manager of planning services. Oh, Councilor Verbeek.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I made a little note here and I was thinking that, are we going to hear from the developer? Because that's who the question is going to be directed to probably. It's something that our director Gerard said in response to your comments about now, other than on paper, I'm not really familiar with the neighborhood. I've been a walkthrough, but that's about it. You were saying that there's lots and on Arthur that have a lot of groundwater lay there. And so in response, I think I understood Director Gerard said the developers have been made aware and you suspect they have plans to deal with the issue. I'm just wondering, like, so I guess it would be a question to the developer. So if indeed we're going to have a chance to hear from him, then, or I'm asking now.
I think they are on Zoom with us. Do we want to go to see if Miss Tracy Pilon-Abs or Brian Pierce, either one of them?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I will defer that question about the stormwater management to Baird AE. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. We did a stormwater management plan up and report for municipal review as well as IRCA's review. We have our civil engineer, Gotham, with us as well tonight. They can sort of walk you through the details of that. Special consideration on the storm pond was given, noting the high water table that's in the area to counteract it. So Gotham, did you want to walk through that with council a little bit?
Yeah, Brian, thanks. Yes, we completed the stormwater report based on the regional guidelines, as already mentioned by Kevin Gerard. Also, we completed like a lot grading to make sure that all the drainage is being cached within the development and nothing is like going beyond the limits of the development. And as well for the lot gradings, we usually, like as per the town standards, we usually have our rear yard catch basins, which would just collect all the stormwaters and it will kind of just put it through the stormwater pond through the municipal storm sewers. So we kind of like included all those in our design. And as well, the stormwater pond is like designed in such a way that it doesn't kind of, there is like a high water table in the development. So we made sure our stormwater pond is above the water level within the development.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I can even add as well with some of the additional questions that were asked by the delegates with respect to builder on record, Castlegate Towers Inc. is the developer and may build some of the lots or may sell them to individuals who will build on their own. And the realtor on record, there is no specific realtor. Those are to be determined. And with respect to the 3 years, we have 3 years to address the conditions of draft plan approval prior to construction. So we hope that we can get those conditions addressed quickly. And the goal is to start building as soon as possible. So happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks.
That was good. That was helpful. Thank you, Councilor Verbeek. That was helpful. Any other questions from members of council? And for those of you in the public, it will be, you have your regular agenda there. The report is coming back in the next council meeting. So if you want to stay around. So at this time, looking for a mover that the presentation regarding the plan of subdivision for phase 2 of the Sunset Garden subdivision by Rita Jabor, Manager of Planning Services, be received. Looking for a mover on that. Councillor Mady, supported by Deputy Mayor Shepley. Any questions to that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. So our delegations, we kind of had them in there already, but we'll have a motion that the delegations listed in item 5B received. Looking for a mover for that. Deputy Mayor Shepley, Councillor McGuire Blaze. Any questions to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor of that? That's carried unanimously. And at this point, we have no other business for this special meeting, so I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Verbeek and Councillor Allard, any questions? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously.